Hello and welcome to week 12 and chapter 12 in Introduction to Psychology. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is social psychology. I teach both psychology and sociology, and I really like the way those intertwine with each other. I often view them as the two sides of the same coin in understanding human behavior. And here's this subfield, but it's really, a multi-dimensional field, a kind of expanding psychology with a bit of understanding of sociology. So let's take a look at chapter 12, social psychology. And we start off, it's essentially a study of you. This is a study of psychology, but it understands and it takes into consideration that you exist within a context. Now look at this little face smiling, surrounded by all these frowns. What factors keep this smiley face smiling even though all the other faces around it are frowning? And that's sort of what we'll be looking at, this essence basically of the situation in which you're in, the individuals that are around you, the culture and the expectations of your behavior have a great impact on your behavior. Now, behavior as we see it in its social context arises because of situational factors or dispositional factors. Now, we're going to return to this in a little bit, but essentially we can look at a person's behavior when they're at work, when they're out in public, when they're with their friends, and we'll go through some of those, and we ask them, well, what essence of this individual's behavior is dispositional, that's how they are, or how much of that, the behavior that we're observing, is because of the unique circumstances that they're in. And when we see people on the news and we see riots and we see people doing really good things, we see people at a concert, we see people at the beach, we see people with their families, we see with them at the bar with friends, we could always ask that question. To what degree is the behavior that we're observing dispositional, an aspect of that person's personality, let's say, or how much of it is situational or circumstantial to the situation that they happen to be in? So we can look at a number of different contexts in which this occurs. First, we look at work. Think how you behave when you're at work and the factors that control your behavior and manage your behavior at work. And they're different than maybe at school. Maybe there's some similarities, but maybe you dress different, maybe you act different, maybe you have a different, we're going to look at roles and statuses there in terms of your behavior. When your boss is there and when your boss is not there, think about that kind of difference. When you're hanging around with your friends, when you're out in public, when you're at the police, when you're interacting with the police. And this is interesting because we do see some racial issues here. And to bring that into the front, we have it's come to the front of our knowledge now, the very different existence that brown and black people have in the United States that includes, for example, very direct instruction from parents, from the responsible parents, giving instruction to their children exactly how to behave if they should get pulled over by the police. I have never got that instruction, and principally we kind of view that because of my white color. I don't necessarily have to worry about that, yet there's this other aspect of culture having in black and brown culture where there's a need to be very clear about what those expectations are because of the risks associated with that. So just let's include that your racial characteristics play a role in this as well. So here we have, how we interact with the police, how we interact with our family, and think about different members of the family, your brother, your parents, your grandparents, those kinds of things, how you might act differently. If you ever met anybody famous, how you might act. And I have a great story about that. There was an individual who was in the liberal studies program several years ago under the leadership of then Governor Angus King. This is when KVCC became a community college. It was KVTC then, and it was KVCC. I just happened to be the third person in line in charge of the liberal studies program at that point, and we had a special meeting to celebrate this. One student in my class was in my sociology class, and when I went over how we act different around people who are famous, she said, "That doesn't bother me. Everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time," which is true. Until that meeting. Well, she was invited to this meeting when Angus King went to all the campuses to celebrate the transition from technical college to community college. And she was just beside herself to get a picture with him, and she was all giggly and all this stuff. And it was just very funny to watch a person who really felt that they were just going to be able to act normally around this person. This wasn't like a rock star or a famous movie star, the governor of Maine, but still a relatively famous individual, and it altered the behavior around the room. It was very interesting to watch that. Now, in addition to people who are famous, how we behave online when we have that kind of sort of anonymity, and how that's not really real, but yet people act as if that is real. So you look at each one of these circumstances, each one of these situations: work, school, boss, friends, public, police, family, famous people, being online, and you act differently. You have a repertoire of behaviors, not because you're a different individual, but you're an individual in different circumstances. Now, one of the other factors of social psychology, now we look at that relative impact that situation has on individuals. Now, some situations, they regulate your behavior. You walk into a store and you're not supposed to shove things into your pockets and stuff like that. People know that. And you're supposed to go line up at the register and you don't pass. And all of these things are sort of behavior dictated by the situation. But given the freedom to choose, let's say you're out in public and I'm going to act in a certain way, or I'm going to be influenced by those people around, we often talk about a concept in social psychology called locus of control. And this is a perception as to my own idea as to what controls my behavior. Do I have a tendency to lean toward external factors controlling my behavior or internal factors controlling my behavior? So we have this internal locus of control versus external locus of control. And let's not call this black and white. It's not like somebody's one way or the other. We're always somewhere along the way, and depending on the circumstances, we may be very external at some times and very internal at others. But it's just to understand this sense of internal and external locus of control that we perceive about ourselves and how that manifests in our lives. So this other graphic right out of the course book here, we have the person on the left. When thinking about their future, I can determine my future. My passion and hard work will help me to achieve my goals. I am in control of my life. Versus the person with external locus of control. I'm stuck. There's nothing I can do to improve my future. Why bother trying? I'll just go with the flow and let luck take care of things. And I'm certain that each one of us have probably encountered individuals like this. What that leads to, now they're separate concepts, but what it leads to is a concept known as the fundamental attribution error. And that's the degree to which we attribute situational factors and or dispositional factors to situations of success and failure. Now, when it's just me, just you and I looking at ourselves, we have a tendency to say that success, should we experience success, is because of me. I worked hard, I studied hard, I'm smart, I'm great, and all these things. And we may have a tendency to see failure as situational. Circumstances prevented me from being successful. The test was too hard. I was never told all this stuff. That was never covered in class, or the individual had too high expectations for me. So because of our egocentric selves, we observe that we have a tendency to see our own success as dispositional and our own failures as situational. On the other hand, when we see other individuals, this is the fundamental error part. When we're looking at other individuals, we have, particularly if they've beaten us at something, if there's a little competitive nature to this, we might say that their success is situational. The refs were on their side. They were cheating. There was something about the situation that made it impossible for me to succeed, and it's the only way I could justify the others succeeding, where we see failure as dispositional. We're very, very likely to see the failure of the opponent team as a lack of skill, and clearly we were a better team. Even if the refs were for our side and it was pretty clear there was, whatever, those kinds of things. So we have this tendency, we have this sort of global sense of internal and external locus of control. And then in observed behavior, we have this, what we tend to see in the data is this fundamental attribution error, where I'll attribute my own successes to attributions of who I am, and I'll attribute other people's success, particularly if they've outcompeted me, I will see them as situational factors. Now that kind of brings us full circle, a little introduction here, and right back, let's talk about social psychology. So we have psychology down. We've been studying that for a little while. What's the social part? The social part is sociology. Now, sociology is essentially the study of groups and culture. And culture is made up of norms, values, and expectations. And every group has its own culture. It is embedded in larger culture, so your family has a culture. It's embedded in your community culture. It's embedded in American culture. And there's influences that come down, but the one we experience the most is the group that we belong to. And you might belong to your family, and then you belong to United Bikers of Maine. And they're two different cultures. They do things differently. They have different norms, values, and expectations. Norms being the short for normal, values, what's important, and expectations having to do with what people are supposed to do. Now, there's a close connection to norms on that, but it's really about people's behavior within those groups. What are we expecting individuals to do? And when people violate any one of those norms, values, and expectations, be them at your home or at the United Bikers of Maine meeting, there is a mechanism of social control that, I don't know, maybe you get a firm talking to at home, or you get grounded, or you get a stern look from your partner, or at the United Bikers of Maine, you start going, Honda sucks or something like that. And, United Bikers of Maine now has a policy that says you're not supposed to put down other people's motorcycle choices. And someone might turn to you and say, hey, we don't do that here anymore. And if you kept on doing it, eventually, maybe they would kick you out. They don't want that kind of attitude there. They're all about riding. So we see all these groups having this sort of independent of the individuals, somewhat independent of the individuals, this culture, norms, values, expectations, and this mechanism for keeping people in line. Now, in addition to that, and this is where those expectations are going to come in, we have a social structure, and within that social structure, there are statuses and roles. Now, the expectations have to do with individuals who have particular statuses and particular roles. And I'm going to explain what those they're related to. So the statuses are job titles and roles are job descriptions. And I'm going to repeat that in just a second here. But that's where expectations are. It's what's your job title, what are you supposed to do? That's what builds my expectations. So the teacher comes in to the room And because they're the teacher, you have a set of expectations as to what they're going to do. And whether or not they do that or not is going to be whether or not they satisfy your expectations for that individual's behavior. Now let's take a look at status and roles here. As I said, status being the job title, role being the job description, and we can look at all of them, and each one of us have many statuses. I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a husband, I'm a teacher, I'm a union member, I'm a band member, I'm a church member, I'm a citizen, I'm a home renter. It just goes on, and you look at each one of those job titles, and they have a to-do list. What are dads supposed to do? What are home renters supposed to do? What are teachers supposed to do? What's my job in the band? That's all of these things. We have these, some come from that larger society. We have expectations as to what parents are going to be about. But let's say some are very specific to the small group, such as in my band. One of my job descriptions, or one of my roles that I have there, I'm the bass player, but I also design and maintain our website. So there's those two pieces that I have as a part of that band. So that's specific to that group. Other aspects such as what do fathers do, what do husbands do, what do employees do, what do citizens do, and all that stuff. There's some generalities that we encompass from larger pieces of our society. Now, when we look at the statuses and roles that we have, they're specific to groups. And we might venture to believe that, in fact, this is you in the middle of this group. It kind of depends. Your ability to keep smiling in this group might depend on whether or not, on what your status is in that group. If you're the boss, fine. If you're the new employee, it'd be really hard to keep smiling under these circumstances. If you're the brand new employee and everybody's looking at you because you messed up something, that'd be really hard to maintain. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time, because you experience these role things very, very distinctly. Getting it. Remember, this is the job description. Each one of you has multiple statuses. So let's just pick on one of you here. One of you is, at the same time, you're a mom and a student. Now there's to-do list under mom and the to-do list under student. And sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes you experience role strain, meaning the roles inside of a status or the roles in between status interfere with each other. It's hard to get them all done. You can't, help your kids with their homework as much because you have your own homework to do, that sort of thing. There's also role conflict, and we draw a distinction between these. Conflict is when I can only do one of these things. So let's look at some examples of these. Under role strain, you have stuff at school, your family obligations, your work obligations, friends, and what's sleep and health. And it's just, you have all this stuff going on. So you experience what we call role strain. This is what we usually talk about when we're talking about I'm feeling stressed. It means I'm a student, family member, worker, I have friends, and I'm trying to take care of myself, and I'm having a really hard time keeping all those plates going. That is called role strain, because each one of those statuses gives you a to-do list, and it's really hard to keep all those things going. On the other hand, sometimes we're faced with a clear conflict. I simply cannot be in two places at the same time, and I have a conflict. So, for example, I was asked by the church recently if I was going to be playing for our Easter service. And there's an expectation that I will go Wednesday for practice, Good Friday's church service, play at that one, and then play at the Sunday service. Now, I have an old friend who's coming to visit for dinner on Friday that has been long planned. So I have a role conflict. I can either maintain the expectation with my friend or maintain the expectation I have with the church. Now, because it's been an old friend that's coming to visit and it's been long planned, I said I can't do that weekend because it was one or the other. I couldn't do both. That was just impossible because they were at the same time. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is clearly one of my favorite topics to discuss in all of my classes. This concept appears everywhere. Now, I need to explain it a little bit. Looking glass self is a theory of self-concept and how that gets built, how that gets structured. Now, we often think about self-concept as the way we see ourselves. But this theory challenges that. That's true. It's the way we see ourselves. But how did we come to those conclusions about how we see ourselves, particularly when we're very young and we start to develop our sense of self? Now, looking glass is the term from older English for a mirror. And what I want you to imagine is you're looking in a mirror and you see a reflection. Now, this is a very, very amazing mirror. It shows you everything you can see about yourself, your actions, your attitudes, your behaviors, your looks, how you act around other people, who you really are. It's a very honest mirror, okay? And what we do with Looking Glass Self, the theory is that we look at that, we look at who we are and what we're doing and all the things that we've achieved or failed at, and then we imagine individuals in our life, specific individuals, our parents, teachers, pastor or priest, any one of those, what would they think if they saw this? It's basically the kind of the formulation of the they, but it's a very specific they. It's the theys that you have selected. Now, sometimes that can be very wide. We can sometimes look at things and we're thinking about the public they, but more often we're thinking about very specific individuals. What would those important individuals say about what I'm seeing in the mirror? And we adopt that perspective as our own, and it becomes our own. So if early on people were very much encouraging you, saying you're intelligent, you can do all these things, eventually you look at your behavior and say, I'm intelligent. My self-perception is the adopted perception of what used to be my perceptions of others and how they viewed me. So in this graphic, we can see here's this individual looking at the mirrors, and he's imagining, look, how my mom and dad see me. I'm an angel. How my girlfriend sees me, has the muscles, very proud. How my older brother sees me, I'm a wimp. There's the muscles hanging underneath. How my ex-girlfriend sees me, I'm a demon. And this individual looks at all these different people and their perspectives and develops a sense of self based on the importance of those individuals. How important is the parents? How important is the girlfriend? How important is the older brother, the ex? Those kind of things. Now I call it the Looking Glass Committee. We have this committee that's out there, and it may include people, it's really, really sad, people who did bad things for us years ago, and yet they still have a seat on that committee. They're in the back of our mind all the time telling us we're dirt, kind of thing like that. Get to that in a little bit. But we have this committee that's sitting there, and every time we do something, plus, minus, kind of thing, and we have to deal with that. Okay? Now, these individuals, they're important people, and it's important to have a committee. We need checks and balances on our behavior. We can't just fly by the seat of our pants here. We want to have those checks and balances. We want to have a boss that says, hey, you're accountable to this. We want to have a list. We want to be accountable to our parents, to our siblings, to our kids, to our spouse. We want to be accountable to people. We want these individuals in our committee. They're very important. But sometimes things can get out of hand. So here we have, what about this person here? Maybe some of us have one of these. No matter what, I don't know who this is, your second grade teacher, maybe it's a parent, they might not even be alive anymore, and you are a lousy, good-for-nothing, stupid idiot, and it lays on you all the time. And I want to give you permission to make some changes. It's time to fire some people on your committee. If you have some people like this, time to get rid of them. Go through the process of getting them off your committee because you decide who is on your looking glass committee. You need good people, you need supportive people, and you need people who will challenge you. You cannot just have people who say yes, yes all the time. So that's an important distinction to be made in terms of who we have on our committee. It's not just everybody that loves us and thinks we're the greatest things. We need people to hold us accountable so that we can be better and we can strive to be better people. Now, another factor that comes up in social psychology, talked about it before, was social control and conformity. And boy, are we right in the middle of discussions about this. Perceptions of control versus conformity versus whatever in terms of social distancing, keeping your mask on. This has been the dialogue that's been going along for so long through this whole thing. Now it's are you going to get your shot or not? I'm proud to say I have my first injection, and I'm waiting until to get the second one to be immunized, and very much from my perspective encourage you to do the same. But people have different thoughts about, is this a form of social control? Am I being forced to this conformity and all this stuff? And there's all kinds of mixed messages about that. Keeping in mind that cultures always do this. All cultures have some sense of conformity. It's always like, let's say we were looking at, health insurance and say, well, why are they forcing us to buy health insurance? I'm like, well, we force you to buy car insurance. You can't register your car without it, and nobody's complaining about that. Why not force people to buy health insurance as well? For the same reasons, for liability that you might create if you can't pay your bills. Or let's say we're asking, back to the car, we're asking you to register your car. Why not register the weapons that you have? So now that's a dicey one, that's one where people get a little worked up about, but it's essentially the same thing. Why should the government know about, how many cars you have, or how many cars can be on the road? And is that very different, let's say, than how many guns somebody has? Now, except that it's in an amendment. I get it. Let's not have that discussion here. That's for an open table with a nice fire going by the ocean, just to keep everything calm. So let's just reserve it for those kind of contexts. Okay, one of the last issues I want to talk about in terms of social psychology is consumer culture and the work of Edward Bernays, who just happens to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud, but on his own created essentially the psychology of manipulation through the media. Whoa. What did this guy do? And he worked with companies. There's a little bit of history there in the course book. I really encourage you to read that and understand. This individual was brought to my attention from one of my faculty, and so I decided to include it in this chapter. So read up on that. And the quote that I put in there, and this is actually the discussion for this week, is the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic societies. Says the manipulation of this is an important aspect of democracy. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, and our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. Discuss that, which is what I'm asking you to do as we go into our assessments, the first discussion is exactly that. I have that quote, and I want you to talk about that and talk about it intelligently, scientifically. Remember, we have internal and external locus of control. To what degree do we feel it influences us? And it does. There's no doubt. Advertising in the media influences us. What do we do to counteract the very compelling messages that are put in front of us, often which align with our ideas and our biases? And with that, I'm asking you to also do a quiz describing your experience with role strain and conflict. And the final assignment is to look at looking glass self. So 3 things to do with this particular chapter, and that will leave us with really kind of fundamental understanding of social psych. Now, we do have a whole class called Social Psychology, where we discuss these things and many, many more. And I encourage you, if this chapter grabs a hold of your imagination, then see if you can take that class the next time that we offer it. So I will see you in the discussion boards, and have a great week.